She found a second phone at exactly 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, hidden inside the false bottom of his Italian leather briefcase. Her hands were trembling. Not from the cold, though the penthouse air conditioning kept everything at a crisp 68 degrees. Not from exhaustion, though she hadn't slept properly in 11 days. Her hands were trembling because the moment she pressed the power button and that screen glowed to life, she knew her entire life was about to unravel. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of luxury, protection, and power. 3 years of convincing herself that loving Dominic Caruso was worth the price of looking away. Now she was looking directly at the thing she'd been afraid to find, and there was no going back. The phone unlocked with a 6-digit code she'd memorized 2 weeks ago from watching his fingers in a restaurant reflection. And the first message that appeared on the screen made her stomach drop to the marble floor beneath her bare feet. It read simply, "She's getting close. We need to move Friday. The usual place. Midnight." The sender's name was saved as Elena. And Elena, whoever she was, had been messaging her husband every single night for the past 7 months. Now here's the question you need to ask yourself. If you were standing in that penthouse, holding evidence that your husband, a man who controls half the shipping ports on the eastern seaboard, a man who has people killed with a phone call, a man who promised you safety in exchange for your silence, was hiding an entire secret relationship, what would you do? Would you confront him and risk everything? Or would you play the game smarter than he ever expected? Before I tell you what she did next, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below telling me, would you confront him immediately, or would you gather more evidence first? Your answer might say more about you than you realize. Now let's get into how this woman outsmarted one of the most dangerous men on the East Coast. Her name was Vivian Price before it became Vivian Caruso. She was 26 when she met him, a corporate attorney at a mid-tier firm in Manhattan, specializing in contract law. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that would explain how she ended up married to a man whose legitimate business empire served as a front for operations that made federal agents lose sleep at night. The story everyone believed was romantic. She was assigned to review a commercial lease agreement for one of his restaurant properties in the meatpacking district. He walked into the conference room, 6'2", silver threading through dark hair at the temples, wearing a suit that cost more than her monthly rent. She quoted a clause that would have cost him an extra $40,000 annually. He smiled and said, "You just saved me more money than my last 3 lawyers combined. Have dinner with me." She said no. He sent flowers to her office every day for 2 weeks. Tasteful arrangements. Never overwhelming. Each one with a card that contained a single question. Coffee? Lunch? Just 1 hour of your time? By the 3rd week, she was curious enough to say yes. By the 3rd month, she was in love enough to ignore what she'd started to learn about who he really was. The wedding happened on March 15th of that year. Spring in Connecticut, at his family's estate. 400 guests. Security that rivaled a presidential detail. Her parents attended, uncomfortable in clothes they couldn't afford to own, smiling nervously at men whose handshakes felt like contracts being signed. She wore a Vera Wang gown that had been custom-fitted over 6 sessions. He wore a look in his eyes that she'd convinced herself was devotion. "I will protect you," he said during their private vows, the ones they whispered to each other before the ceremony. "No matter what happens in my world, you will always be safe inside it." She believed him. She wanted to believe him so badly that she stopped asking questions about the late meetings, the men who came and went through the service entrance, the news stories about rival families that ended with body counts. She became the perfect wife. Gracious at charity events. Silent during business dinners. Invisible when the conversations turned cold. For 2 years, this arrangement worked. She had everything money could buy and nothing that money couldn't fix. And then, 6 months ago, her husband started lying. The first sign was small. Thursday, April 4th, around 9:30 p.m. They were finishing dinner in the formal dining room of their penthouse, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park. Dominic's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted for exactly half a second. Not long enough for anyone else to notice. But Vivian had spent 3 years studying this man's face. She knew every micro-expression, every tell. Something in that message made him careful. He excused himself to take the call in his study. When he returned 20 minutes later, he said it was a shipping delay in Rotterdam. She nodded and sipped her wine. She didn't mention that she'd heard him say a woman's name through the study door. A name she didn't recognize. The second sign came 11 days later. Tuesday, April 15, 11:15 p.m. He dressed in the dark, trying not to wake her. She wasn't asleep. She watched through half-closed eyes as he chose clothes that were too casual for business, too careful for something innocent. Dark jeans. A black sweater. No jewelry except his wedding ring. He left the penthouse without a word. She heard the elevator descend at 11:22 p.m. She didn't hear it return until 4:47 a.m. The next morning, he kissed her forehead and said he'd been in the study all night, reviewing quarterly projections. She smiled and said she'd slept like a stone. Both of them lied with the ease of people who had been practicing for years. The third sign was the most damning. Friday, April 18th. She came home early from a luncheon, a headache pounding behind her eyes. The penthouse was supposed to be empty. Instead, she found Marco, Dominic's head of security, standing in the hallway outside the master bedroom. Marco was 6'4", built like a refrigerator, and had been with the family for 15 years. He'd never once been inside the private residence floors without Dominic present. "Mrs. Caruso," he said, and his voice was too smooth. "I didn't expect you back so soon." She asked why he was there. He said he was checking a sensor malfunction in the security system. She smiled and walked past him. Inside the bedroom, nothing looked disturbed. But the air smelled wrong. Not her perfume. Not the cedar and sandalwood of Dominic's cologne. Something floral. Something feminine. Something that shouldn't have been there. This is when a smarter woman might have confronted her husband. This is when a weaker woman might have broken down. Vivian did neither. Instead, she started keeping a journal. A small leather notebook that she hid inside a hollowed-out copy of Anna Karenina on her bookshelf. Irony wasn't lost on her. In that journal, she documented everything. Dates. Times. Behaviors. The nights he left. The mornings he lied. The phone calls he took in other rooms. The way Marco watched her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. She became an investigator in her own home, gathering evidence like a prosecutor building a case. She didn't know yet what the crime was. But she knew something was happening in the shadows of her marriage. And she knew that understanding it was the only way to survive it. The pattern emerged on May 3rd. She'd been tracking his movements for 3 weeks, cross-referencing them with his official schedule that his assistant sent her each Monday. The discrepancies were consistent. Every Tuesday and Friday night, between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., Dominic was unaccounted for. His driver's logs showed the car leaving the building but listed the destination as a private. His credit cards showed no charges during those hours. His phone, the one he used openly, showed no calls or messages. Wherever he went, he didn't want a digital trail. But Vivian had learned long ago that men in power always leave traces. They just assume no one is clever enough to find them. On May 7th, she found her first real clue. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and she was scheduled to attend a board meeting for a children's hospital charity she'd been appointed to as part of her role as Mrs. Caruso. The meeting was cancelled last minute. She returned home at 3:15 p.m., 2 hours before Dominic was expected back from his offices in the financial district. She told herself she was going to take a bath and read a book. She was lying. What she actually did was search his closet. She'd done this before, of course. She'd checked pockets, inspected shirt collars, looked for the obvious signs of infidelity. She'd found nothing. This time, she looked deeper. She removed the false bottom of his Italian leather briefcase, the one he always kept locked, using a lockpick technique she'd learned from a YouTube video at 2 a.m. the previous week. Inside, she found a burner phone, $3,000 in cash, and a key to a safe deposit box at a bank she'd never heard of. The phone was dead. She plugged it in, memorized everything she saw, and put it back exactly as she'd found it. She replaced the false bottom. She returned to the bedroom. And she waited. The phone, when she finally accessed it 2 days later, contained 7 months of text conversations with Elena. The messages were careful. No explicit details. No photographs. But the intimacy was unmistakable. I miss you. Tonight was perfect. Soon we won't have to hide. Reading them felt like swallowing broken glass. 3 years of her life had been built on a foundation she thought was solid, and now she could feel it crumbling beneath her feet. But as she scrolled deeper, something changed. The messages weren't just romantic. They were strategic. Elena wrote about the arrangement. About what happens after. About the families, and the transition, and what he promised. This wasn't just an affair. This was something bigger. This was something that could bring everything down. Vivian needed to know who Elena was. On May 10th, she hired a private investigator, not through normal channels, but through a contact of a contact, a woman she'd met at a charity event who had once whispered that she knew people who could find anyone. The investigator's name was Ruth Chen, a former FBI analyst who'd left the bureau under circumstances she never explained. Ruth charged $15,000 in cash, no receipt, no records. Vivian paid with money she'd been quietly siphoning from her household account for months, converting it to cash in small increments that wouldn't trigger attention. Ruth asked for any details Vivian had. Vivian gave her the name Elena, a physical description she'd pieced together from context clues, dark hair, approximately 30 years old, connected to powerful families, and the location of the safe deposit box. Ruth said she'd have preliminary findings in 72 hours. Vivian went home and smiled at her husband over dinner like nothing had changed. The near exposure happened on May 12th, and it nearly ended everything. She was in Dominic's study, looking for additional evidence, when she heard footsteps in the hallway. It was 2 p.m. on a Monday. Dominic was supposed to be at his offices until 6. She had exactly 8 seconds to hide before the study door opened. She slid behind the heavy velvet curtains, pressing herself against the cold window glass, her heart pounding so hard she was certain it could be heard. Dominic entered with Marco. They stood less than 6 feet from where she was hidden. She's been asking questions, Marco said. The staff at the Blackwood noticed her visiting twice this week. There was a pause. Vivian couldn't see Dominic's face, but she could imagine the calculation in his eyes. About what? He asked. The property. Who uses it? When it's booked. Another pause. And what did they tell her? Nothing. They know better. But she's smart, Dom. I'm smarter than you want to believe. The silence that followed lasted an eternity. Then Dominic spoke again, and his voice was ice. Then we accelerate the timeline. Friday is too late. We move Thursday. Marco left. Dominic stood in the study for another full minute before following. Vivian didn't move for 10 minutes after they were gone. Her legs were shaking. Her mind was racing. Thursday was 2 days away. And whatever was happening, she was running out of time to understand it before it was too late. Ruth called on May 13th at 9:47 a.m. Vivian took the call in her car, parked in a garage downtown, having told her driver she wanted to shop alone for an anniversary gift. I found her, Ruth said. Elena Vasquez. 32 years old. Born in Madrid, educated in Switzerland, came to the United States on a diplomatic visa 7 years ago. Here's where it gets interesting. Her family isn't just rich, Vivian. They're connected to the Delgado syndicate. Spanish organized crime. They've been trying to establish a foothold in the American market for a decade. Vivian felt the blood drain from her face. The Delgados were rivals. Not direct competitors, but players in adjacent territories, occasionally allies, more often adversaries. And Elena? Vivian asked. Elena is the middle daughter. Third in line for leadership. And according to my sources, she's been positioning herself for something big. Something that requires a powerful American ally. Vivian understood immediately. This wasn't just an affair. This was an alliance. Dominic wasn't cheating on her. He was preparing to replace her with a wife who brought an entire criminal empire as a dowry. But there was more. Ruth hesitated before continuing. There's something else. About Elena. About what she's really doing in this arrangement. Ruth explained that Elena Vasquez had been under surveillance by American law enforcement for 3 years. Not as a target, but as an asset. She was cooperating with federal investigators, feeding them information about the Delgado operations in exchange for immunity and protection. If Elena married Dominic, she wouldn't just be linking two families. She would be placing an FBI informant inside the Caruso organization. Vivian processed this information slowly. Either Dominic knew what Elena was, and he was playing a game so complex that even Vivian couldn't see all the moves. Or Dominic had no idea, and Elena was playing him. Either way, Vivian was caught in the middle. And either way, Thursday was coming fast. The emotional conflict hit her that night, alone in the darkness of the bedroom while Dominic slept beside her. She looked at his face in the moonlight. The strong jaw. The slight scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident he told her about on their second date. The way his breathing deepened when he was truly relaxed, something that only happened when she was near. Part of her wanted to wake him. Part of her wanted to shake him and scream and demand to know how much of their life together had been real. She'd loved this man. She'd given up her career, her independence, her ability to look at herself in the mirror without asking what she'd become. She'd made peace with his world because she believed, truly believed, that inside that world, she mattered to him. Had she ever mattered at all? Or had she always been temporary, a placeholder until the right strategic opportunity came along? She didn't cry. She was too angry to cry. And anger, she realized, was clearer than grief. On May 14th, the day before whatever was scheduled to happen on Thursday, Vivian made her move. She didn't confront Dominic. She didn't run. Instead, she did something far more dangerous. She reached out to the only person who might be able to help her, Anthony Caruso, Dominic's younger brother. Anthony had been pushed out of the family business 3 years ago, officially due to creative differences, unofficially because he'd challenged their father's succession plan and lost. He lived in Boston now, running legitimate investment funds, pretending he'd chosen the straight life. But Vivian knew the truth. Anthony still had sources inside the family. Anthony still talked to people who talked to other people. And Anthony had never liked the way his brother treated the women in his life. She called him from a burner phone she'd purchased that morning. "I need to meet," she said. "I have information that could destroy everything your brother has built. And I have 48 hours to decide what to do with it." Anthony was silent for exactly 5 seconds. Then he said, "There's a coffee shop on Boylston Street. The one with the green awning. Be there in 3 hours." The meeting with Anthony lasted 90 minutes. She told him everything. The affair. Elena. The federal connection. The Thursday deadline. Anthony listened without interrupting, his expression darkening with every revelation. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for years. "I knew he was planning something," Anthony said. "The family council has been restless. The old guard thinks Dominic is too aggressive, too willing to make deals with outsiders. If they find out he's bringing a federal asset into the inner circle, even unwittingly, they'll kill him. Not metaphorically. They will literally end his life." Vivian nodded. She'd already calculated this. "And what happens to me?" Anthony met her eyes. "If you do nothing, you become collateral damage in whatever fallout comes. If you try to expose him, You become a liability, and liabilities get handled. He paused. But there's a third option. Vivian waited. You become the one who saves the family. You expose Elena to the council before Dominic can complete the arrangement. You position yourself as the loyal wife who caught what no one else did. You become untouchable. The idea was elegant. And terrible. And maybe the only way she survived. Thursday, May 15th, arrived with a cloudless sky and a tension in the penthouse that made the air feel electric. Dominic kissed her goodbye at 7:30 a.m., telling her he had meetings all day and would be home late. She smiled and wished him luck. She didn't tell him that she knew exactly where his meetings would take him. At 11 a.m., she dressed in something understated but powerful, a navy dress, modest jewelry, hair pulled back. She requested the car at noon. She told her driver to take her to an address on the Upper East Side. An address she'd found in Ruth's files. An address where the Caruso family council met when matters were too sensitive for normal channels. The driver hesitated. "Ma'am, that location is, I know exactly what it is," she said. Drive. The council met in a private room on the third floor of what looked like an exclusive social club. 4 men. All of them older than Dominic. All of them with blood on their hands that would never wash off. They weren't expecting her. When she walked through the door, unannounced and uninvited, every eye in the room went sharp. "Mrs. Caruso," said the eldest, a man named Salvatore Martinelli who had been running operations since before Dominic was born. "This is unexpected." She didn't sit. She stood at the head of the table, commanding the room like she belonged there. "I'm here because my husband is about to make a mistake that will destroy this family. And I'm here because I'm the only one who knows how to stop it." She laid out everything. The affair with Elena. The Delgado connection. The federal surveillance. The Thursday timeline. She produced documents Ruth had compiled, banking records, surveillance photographs, communication logs. She presented it all with the precision of the attorney she'd once been, building a case that left no room for doubt. The men listened in increasingly horrified silence. When she finished, Martinelli looked at the others. Something passed between them. A decision made in a language of glances that she couldn't fully read. "You're telling us," Martinelli said slowly, "that Dominic is preparing to marry a federal informant. To bring her into the family. To give her access to everything we've built." "Yes." "And you came to us instead of confronting him directly." "Yes." Martinelli studied her. "Why?" Vivian held his gaze. "Because I'm not stupid enough to think I could stop him alone. And because I'm loyal to this family, even if my husband isn't." The confrontation happened at 9:47 p.m. that same evening. Dominic returned to the penthouse to find Vivian waiting in the living room, a glass of wine untouched on the table in front of her. He knew something was wrong the moment he walked in. She could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his eyes scanned the room for threats. "Vivian," he said carefully. "What's going on?" She stood. Slowly. Deliberately. "I met with the council today." The blood drained from his face. In 3 years of marriage, she had never seen him afraid. She saw it now. "They know about Elena," she continued. "They know what she is. They know what you were planning." He didn't deny it. He didn't try to explain. He just stood there, frozen, calculating his options. "How long have you known?" he finally asked. "Long enough to decide what to do about it." "And what did you decide?" She crossed the room until she was standing directly in front of him. Close enough to touch. Close enough that he could see every flicker of emotion in her eyes. "I decided that our marriage matters more than your affair. I decided that protecting this family matters more than punishing you. I decided that you owe me, Dominic. You owe me everything." He swallowed. "What do you want?" She smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "Everything." The fallout was swift and brutal, though not in the way anyone expected. Elena Vasquez was intercepted that night at a private airfield outside the city. The council's people were waiting when her plane landed. What happened to her, Vivian never asked and was never told. The arrangement with the Delgado family collapsed immediately. There were threats, posturing, an uncomfortable week where everyone waited to see if violence would follow. It didn't. The Delgados were pragmatic. They recognized when a play had failed and cut their losses accordingly. As for Dominic, he was not removed from power. The council decided he was too valuable, too connected, too necessary for ongoing operations. But his authority was diminished. He reported to Martinelli now on major decisions. His inner circle was restructured. People he trusted were replaced with people who trusted the council more. He accepted all of it without complaint. Because the alternative was a bullet in a warehouse somewhere, and Dominic had always known how to survive. But the biggest change was in the marriage itself. Vivian did not move into a separate bedroom. She did not file for divorce. She did not retreat into the role of decorative wife she had played for 3 years. Instead, she demanded and received a seat at the table. She attended meetings she had never been allowed to know existed. She reviewed operations, offered strategic counsel, and built relationships with the men who had once looked through her like she was furniture. Dominic watched this transformation with something that looked almost like respect. And perhaps a trace of fear. She had outmaneuvered him. She had survived when survival seemed impossible. And now she held power in a family that had never intended to share any with her. The final twist came 6 months later, on a cold November evening in the penthouse. Vivian was reviewing documents in the study, her study now, as much as his, when Martinelli requested a private audience. He arrived alone, which was unusual. He sat across from her, studied her with those ancient, calculating eyes, and then he told her the truth. Elena was never just a federal asset, he said. She was ours too. We placed her. We cultivated her relationship with the FBI. We fed them information through her for 3 years, enough to be useful, nothing that could truly hurt us. And when Dominic began his little arrangement, we let it play out. We wanted to see what would happen. Vivian felt the room tilt. You were testing him. We were testing both of you. Martinelli smiled, and there was genuine admiration in it. He failed. He let his ego blind him to what Elena really was. But you did something none of us expected. You found the truth, and instead of panicking, you used it. You protected the family before you protected yourself. That kind of loyalty, that kind of intelligence, is rare. Vivian's mind was racing. And the council meeting? My presentation? Genuine. Your information was real. Your actions were real. We just wanted to see if you would take them. And you did. Why tell me now? Martinelli stood. Because Dominic isn't going to lead this family forever. And when the time comes to choose his successor, I want you to understand what we value. What we reward. And what kind of person survives in our world. He left without another word. Vivian sat alone in the study for a long time after he was gone. Outside, the city glittered with November frost. Somewhere below, in the streets she had once walked as an anonymous attorney with a normal life, people were going about their evenings, unaware of the empires rising and falling in the towers above them. She thought about the woman she had been 3 years ago. Naive enough to believe that love could coexist with power. Foolish enough to think that safety came without cost. That woman was gone now. In her place was someone harder. Someone sharper. Someone who understood that in this world, you were either a player or you were a piece. And Vivian Caruso had decided which one she was going to be. She picked up her phone and made a call. Anthony answered on the second ring. It's done, she said. Martinelli made contact. And he offered exactly what we predicted. A path to the top. She could hear the smile in Anthony's voice. Then it's finally starting. Yes, she said. It is. Because here's the thing nobody in the Caruso family understood yet. Anthony hadn't reached out to Vivian by accident that day in the coffee shop. She had reached out to him. Not because she needed help surviving. Because she needed an ally for what came next. The affair, the investigation, the council meeting, all of it had been her audition for a role she'd been preparing to play since the moment she first suspected her husband's betrayal. And now she had Martinelli's attention. She had the council's respect. She had a husband who was diminished but still useful. And she had a brother-in-law who wanted the throne as badly as she did. In 2 years, maybe 3, there would be another transition. Another power shift. And when it happened, Vivian Caruso would not be a wife standing in someone else's shadow. She would be the one casting the shadow. She looked at the city lights and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not safety. Not love. Not the comfortable numbness of looking away. She felt power. Real power. The kind that came from understanding exactly what you were willing to do, and doing it without flinching. The kind that came from being underestimated so completely that no one saw you coming until you were already there. She raised her glass, the same one she'd left untouched hours earlier, and drank to her own reflection in the dark window. "Thank you, Elena," she whispered to no one. "Wherever you are." Because without Elena, she'd still be just a wife. Now she was something much more dangerous. She was a contender. "Now I want to hear from you. What do you think Vivian's next move should be? Should she stay loyal to her alliance with Anthony and push for the leadership position? Should she reconcile with Dominic now that she holds all the cards? Or should she trust no one and build her power independently, knowing that everyone in this world eventually betrays everyone else? Drop your answer in the comments below. And while you're here, let me know what kind of story you want to see next. Should I tell you about the bodyguard who fell in love with the woman he was supposed to be protecting, only to discover she was playing him the entire time? Or maybe the story of the undercover agent who married into a crime family and forgot which life was real? Subscribe so you don't miss either one. And remember, in this world, trust is just another weapon. Use it wisely.